Without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Anandamoy Roychowdhary, Principal at Sequoia Capital India, on the show. Thank you
Oh,
so much, Roy, for joining me. It's such an honor for me to be able to host you.
no, thank you so much for having me. You make me sound like someone who runs a school. You just call me Roy. The rest of it's not needed. So yeah, it's Roy working at Sequoia, do early stage investments.
Honestly, looking forward to this exciting episode. I want to start up with, like a very abstract question of sorts and goes back to one of our conversations during the pre-call to this recording, right? And you mentioned this line that has stuck around with me. I tweeted about it and have been thinking about it as well and genuinely curious to understand, what got you to that conclusion. So you mentioned that it's not about getting it right by 30, it's about getting it right at all. And I felt that there are so many variables and components to that phrase that I've kept on thinking about it because, what does mean to begin with, right? And how do you define all of that? And how do you go about figuring out that pathway? I think that's a very powerful phrase. And I'd love for you to perhaps, elucidate a bit further upon it, especially given that the audience base is pretty young at this point in time. And that's, we're targeting future founders here. So would love your opinion there.
No, thank you for that. No, I think I was as guilty of this as anybody. When I was young, uh, I mean, there are cliches about this, right? Like life's a marathon, not a race. All of that stuff, right?
Right.
And it really wasn't clear to me what that meant. And it took a little bit of time before I figured out what exactly it meant to make decisions that steadily compound year on year on year, and how everything you do is essentially a platform for what comes next, right? And when I look at some of our Decacorn founders, and I think about who in India will be the first one to basically run $100 billion startup. These are just people like us, right? It's just that there's a definite sort of relentless focus on getting better, and there's a relentless focus on sort of compounding that I think a lot of them focus on. That, especially in a world where you've grown up with a lot of sort of short-term stimulus, and so a lot of focus is on what you can get done quickly. People sometimes forget that taking a long-term view, trying to acquire a skill, steadily compounding it for years and years and years, is actually super, super valuable, right? The thing that, I think most of you will experience as you try to acquire a skill, right, is that there's a very interesting sort of valley, right? When you start something, it's very cool. You have a lot of fun, you get better really fast, right? And then you hit this period, that I think of as a period of suck, right? Like it sucks. It happens to you if you're weightlifting. It happens to you if you're running. It happens to you if you're trying to learn a skill, right? You get very good fairly quickly, and then it is just like it's just unclear why you are if you're getting better at all, and you just have to keep at it, and it sucks, and there's no validation, and there's no external or internal sign that you're really learning anything at all. And the people who keep at it anyways are the ones who will sort of break through to the other side and become world class. And the rewards for being world class, both sort of personal as well as external, if that's what you want, is pretty ridiculous. And so my only message to people is that you should aspire to be world class. The people who are world class today, all of these founders that we adulate and talk about in the press, and are they're all just people. They all just work really hard and compound it. And if you do the same, there's no reason why you can't join sort of their ranks, right? I think that's the message. When I meet younger folks today, they are. What I really like now is everyone's a lot more fearless. When I got started in India, there really wasn't any. I mean, people didn't think this entrepreneurship thing was real, right? And so, we were all just excited to be working at a nice American company. And now, entrepreneurship is real. People have seen enough of it that they know they can do it. But what they haven't seen enough of is, what it takes to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, long rambling answer, but hopefully.
No, not at all rambling. I think as you were just mentioning that as well, I was thinking of it from my context as well. When am I going to reach that period of suck for my podcast, for this itself?
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, that there's a lot of merit in just showing up, as they say, right? Just doing it
Yeah,
week on week. Like, the only rule I started off with was, just deliver an episode each Sunday and let's see where this goes. And I think
exactly.
like it's amazing. I love
Yeah.
that answer, to be honest, and I want to deep dive into a lot of the things, but I want to also take a step back and go back to your journey, right? Because you were growing up at a time where the internet was blossoming, India was maturing as the ecosystem was maturing and all of that, and you were in amidst the presence of the biggest headwind of the century, perhaps, right? The revolution of technology, internet, and everything, right? So how at the time, what was the direction like for yourself? Because as I could gather, you were educated as an engineer, and then you went on that pathway. You built products, built teams, worked at multiple companies before you came at Sequoia. So how was your thought process like with context to your journey? And what was your thinking in terms of deciding the next, let's say, 5 years of your life? Because I think that, as you mentioned in your answer as well, right? We as youngsters take very short-sighted decisions, right? So just want to take a step back, understand your journey, how you landed up here, and what's been the learnings like for you across the years.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. So, I mean, this is going to make me sound incredibly old, but I graduated in 1999. Okay. That's how far back this goes. Sometimes people are like, wait, there was, the world existed before the year 2000. I was like, I was in it, so I can vouch for it. So, graduated in 99. And, the thing was, I'll tell you the interesting thing for me looking back. See, back then I was very ambitious as an engineer.
Mhm.
But in 99, when you graduated, your best bet was to go work at one of the IT services firms back then, like the Wipros and the Infosys of the world, were the preferred employers of choice, right? Because they were really good companies. But they were all built around this concept of wait for your turn, right? Like you'd go there, you join something called the bench, you'd wait around, they'd train you. At some point you'd get to work on a project, stuff like that, right? And that didn't sit well with me because I wasn't willing to spend that kind of time, right? I wanted to get at it quickly. And this thing, and actually, if you ever read Peter Thiel's book, he actually articulates this really well, right? It's that lots of people don't ask us very simple question, which is something that you think will take 10 years. Can you do it in 6 months? And I didn't know that was a question other people asked, but I did ask that question of myself is like, can I become an engineering leader in 6 months? And, part of this was, I joined a really small company. Part of it was I was good at sort of, building things. And part of it, there just was a lot of opportunity because there just weren't that many senior people around. That I actually got to be VP of engineering, literally within 7-8 months of starting my career. It was pretty funny, we'd work for external clients and, we were like, yeah, this is the VP of engineering, but he's got 8 years of experience. I mean, 8 months of experience, sorry, in total. I mean, we won't talk about the 8 months that much, right? And honestly, I didn't know anything, right? In retrospect, I mean, I cringe when I think about how I went about stuff. But what I had two things. I had crazy energy, and I sort of brought it every day. Like I came every day. I was convinced that I was, that I had what it takes to be world class, and so I followed that journey, right? And so I started a services firm. Then I moved to working at a startup. That startup exploded sort of fairly spectacularly, and that's what got me hooked on the startup journey. Because till then I was a little afraid, and then I went to work for a startup, and we ran out of money, and we had to shut down, and we had to lock the doors. And I was like, hey, if this is the worst that's going to happen, I can deal with this. This is very simple, right? If this is the worst thing I have to do, I've already seen the worst. I can handle it. No problem, right? And that basically put me on this path of, I've worked at like, 6-7 startups since then. And almost none of them actually went on to do really well, with the exception maybe of Zynga, right? Where I would argue, I mean, I wasn't really part of the founding team or anything. I was just somebody who worked there. I was an early employee, but by no stretch part of the founding team. And even though none of them really went on to become massive, the huge thing for me was that at each of these places, I was able to grow much more rapidly than I would have if I had stuck around in a larger company and waited for my turn, right? And so, I think that was the thing that at least now when I'm asked to give people advice, I basically tell them, put yourself in a situation where you're supremely uncomfortable, and B, you can just learn a lot, right? And and try to solve for that. Solve for being able to learn a lot and for being uncomfortable and for truly being challenged on the things that you think you are good at, right? Rather than like saying, hey, I'm very good at this. I'm going to find my niche and like occupy it. Just be out there for a bit and get your ass kicked, right? And you'd be surprised at how much learning and how much compounding comes from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that was sort of very sort of useful for me. And then, I moved to the US, which is what everybody broadly does, and I'm very glad to have done that because I think that, the reality was I was a 24-year-old, VP of engineering in India, CTO type, but really, what did I know about managing people or building something really large, right? We were working on building bits and pieces for other companies. And then I wanted to go work for my own sort of, startup kind of thing, right? And so then I joined this early team, worked on building technology, moved to Boston, lived there for a bit, moved to California, San Francisco, lived there for a very long time. And then, of course, for various reasons, which were actually not, almost none of them were career related, much more family related. Just, my parents were getting older. And I'd been away from home for like 10 years. I was like, I want to come back, right? And I was excited about India. I believe the thing that was really interesting for me is that, at Zynga, when I sort of took on the role of like running the Z Cloud sort of engineering org, I was running the US team and the India team. And I was like, we'll build a senior US team, we'll build a slightly more junior India team. The US team will tell the India team what to do and they'll work on it like that. And that was the thought process, right? And that's not what happened at all. It was the exact opposite, right? Like I show up in India and then I meet these people and I'm like, holy shit, man, I don't know what happened. But in the last 10 years, a bunch of these guys actually learned something. And, they can all actually really build software, right? For example, like, Prakash, who is now the CTO at Byju's, he and I used to work together at Zynga. It just blew my mind when I met this guy. I was like, holy shit, there's a guy like this just hanging out here at Zynga who just, in my view, one of the smartest people on the, in Bangalore. And, this guy just knows everything, and then there was Prashun and there were others. The level of engineering talent that I intersected with at Zynga made me realize that I had actually missed something very important, which is that because of the amount of work that had happened in India, these engineers, these architects had gotten to be really senior. They were really senior. They were very seasoned. They knew how to build software. And, and once you have that kind of raw material, right, then we are going to be able to build some sort of very interesting companies, right? And so that was actually, I'm very glad I came back to India because, my first instinct was that, hey, this was going to be a bit of a damper from a career perspective. But, it's okay. I'll take the hit was my thought. But then that's not how it played out. I was like, holy shit, actually something very interesting can happen here. Mm-hmm. And then, I ran into the Sequoia folks and they were like, hey, we want someone to come sort of help some of our companies, think through tech, etc. How do you think about sort of, maybe coming on for a year? I was like, yeah, that sounds like an interesting gig. We'd spend a year, we'd try to, do it together. It was very interesting for me, right? Because again, like a lot of people, I had this belief that, VCs only hire from the IITs. They're very, the classic cliches, right? And, I don't even have a master's degree. I have a bachelor's degree from I hope they forgive me for saying this, but, it's not exactly a top tier school. All of that, right? Never really studied before that. Wasn't really distinguished academically or in that zone. And so I was intrigued by the fact that Sequoia was not really looking at all of that. They were basically looking past that and saying, hey, listen, we've heard some things that, you can do this stuff and we'd love for you to see if you can do that in some of our portfolio. And that was 8 years ago, and I've been now at Sequoia for 8 years. It's my sort of running joke with Shailendra is like, hey, is this experiment going well? Like, do you want to like, running on it, whatever, right? So, we have, right? So now I'm sort of, part of the investment team, focused on a lot of the early stage investing, very focused on dev tools, very focused on cloud infrastructure, very focused on SaaS and AI companies, because that's the stuff I've built as a CTO and VP of engineering. And so, I feel like, there is value that I can provide those companies as they think about go-to-market, as they think about how to build out their engineering teams and, from a hiring perspective and things like that. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the journey. It's, again, I'll be honest, right? Like if you told if somebody told me at 25 that I would work at Sequoia, I'd be like, yeah, there's no chance to. Even with my very healthy sense of self-esteem, I would not have assumed that I would have been able to land up at a place like this and work with the people I get to work with, right? Uh, and so again, I attribute that to a little bit. I mean, a lot of it was luck, right? Just right place, right time. You should never sort of discount that. But also a lot of it was just, I just kept at it, right? And I think that's the part that people sort of, that's the message broadly, right? Just keep at it. Even now I keep thinking about, what am I going to do? How do I compound for the next 10 years, right? Is a question that I currently sort of wrestle with. Because I'm still young, at least in my view, and I've got stuff to build and things to get done. So yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Wow, that was amazing to hear. And I see this. I don't know. I was just thinking out loud here, right? I saw there's this pattern of great ambition. Of course, like I'm not discounting the timing and the luck, serendipity factors, but great ambition coupled with putting yourself in like discomfort, right? So I just want to understand how much of that plays a role in making decisions in terms of founders as well, right? Because I'm sure you've been asked this, like, how do you make an investment? And beyond that, basic question of large markets, great teams, huge pain point, and all of that, what is it that really matters in founders that that attracts your eye to the extent that you're able to develop conviction, and how much of this plays a role in that as well? Because I'm sure, like, this is a double-edged sword in the sense that you want to be ambitious, but how do you constantly put yourself in situations that externally also push you to keep following your mission, right? So I'm not sure if this follows a pattern or something of the sort, but I'd love your opinion here and what you have.
It's a question I ask myself of every founder I work with, is that is this person sort of truly willing to be world class?
Mm-hmm.
And are they willing to sort of embrace the pain that comes with it, right? And that's not, it's not that hard to figure out that, some people, they just like good things. They like to be told good things. They like to hear good things. They like validation. They're looking for validation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there are people who are looking for truth, right? And, I think the people who look for truth, who are willing to have a hard conversation, and not in a self-flagellating way, but, in a way that says, hey, listen, there are things that I know that we're good at, and there are things I know we're bad at. But there is some clarity about sort of how they will sort of, go from where they are to, to the top of the mountain that they're looking to climb, right? I think that's really what at least I look for a lot more. I think, to be honest, market size is one of those things that I've never been able to figure out. Market size has surprised me on everything, right? Like everything seems to be bigger.
Mm-hmm.
When I looked at Calendly recently, I was like, how, it's incredible how big that business is, right? And I, gun to my head, I would never have imagined that, to be true if someone had showed me that company, 6, 7, 8 years ago, right? So yeah, yes, we try to do some market size work. We try to do some, reference checks on founders and, talk to them, etc. But, I think that what I look for, it's actually not that hard to find people who truly care about the truth and who truly care about being uncomfortable. I'll give you an example, right? For me, like, I could have joined a Google. In fact, I interviewed at Google 3 times and, they made me a job offer twice and I didn't take it, right? I could have joined VMware. I could have joined a bunch of these companies. I would have made a fairly nice sum of money. I'd have been very comfortable. And each time I went and joined a startup that eventually I had to lock the doors off, and so the first time I did it, I was like, okay, this sucks. I could have made some real money. And the second time I was like, hey, this is really fun. I'm going to keep doing this, right? And so I look for that pattern in founders as well, which is, are they driven to be the greatest they can be? I think that's important.
Wow. I think I love that fact, the way you've gone about elaborating on that spectrum. I think it's a great, I don't think too many conversations that I've had with people of my age think of it that way. And I think it's more important to be able to, push yourself to the extent that you're not choosing the most comfortable pathway and optimizing for long-term success as opposed to short-term one. Great.
I think, sorry, just the only thing there is that, See, that is something that you can't do with funding. Like, you are either that person or you're not, right?
Right.
And if you're that person, and if you're the person who looks for truth, looks for their own truth, looks for the truth in other things, and seeks it, right? That pattern is actually not that hard to demonstrate. And when you see that in a founder, you really always want to invest.
Got it. Yes, I mean, sticking to the basics, and this is a good segue to, I guess, the next question, where, so I heard this episode where Reid Hoffman is talking to Kevin Systrom of Instagram, and they call it the keeping it simple episode, right? The idea is that, how well can, let's say, anybody, like founders in general and tech folks in specific, explain their concepts, their ideas, their products in the simplest manner possible, right? To be the quality of being able to demystify things in the simplest manner. I mean, how important has that been in your, experiences, and how much of a role does that play in a founder when you're developing conviction as to whether to invest or not invest, and just in the product building journey as well? Because especially from a non-tech background, when I'm trying to understand technical concepts, I feel the best explained ones, or the ones that I best understand, are the ones which are in simplest to understand in the way that somebody's explained them. So would love your cues there, how much of it plays a role in understanding the founders, understanding the company and the solutions that they're building.
My answer is going to sound very different from everything you've heard, right? I actually think that there are two parts to it. I think there is a trap. There is the articulate trap, right? People are very articulate sometimes about what they do.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they understand it. It just means that they've learned the words. They're, convincing when they repeat the words, right? And so, you want to avoid those kinds of people if you can. Mm-hmm. Then there are people who are able to simplify and explain it. But the reason they're able to explain it simply is because they have not understood the nuances. That's another set of people that you want to avoid. The reality of life is that life is messy. And there's a ton of nuance. Okay. And at least for me, I want to know that you know and understand and can navigate the nuances. Right. And so I personally I try to be a plain speaker. I try to be, straight and simple and, try to get to the point, as easily as I can. But there are freaking nuances, man. There just is not that many, there's a reason why the, Newton's laws. You know what I mean? Like that level of simplicity and clear governance of behavior does not exist. Right. And also what's really interesting often is that things are only really interesting when they go from being true to false, right? So, there's something we believed for a while and it was the right thing to believe in, but it's about to turn false. Mm-hmm. And if you figure that out before somebody else, then that's where you make money, right? In that sort of edge trigger, right? And so you want to say, listen, this is why the edge trigger. So you have to have some nuance. And so at least my view is be simple, try to avoid jargon for sure, right? And don't let people take you down the path of saying, just be honest with yourself. Do you really understand this, or are you just using words which you've heard somewhere else because you're trying to prove that you know something, right? But at the same time, you should always pick a venture partner who understands the nuances of what you're building. The problem with being very simple and the people then gravitating to simplicity is that the nuances don't care. They will show up. Okay. You're going to have to deal with them. And if at that point you have a partner who's like, well, you never told me this in the beginning, you now are in trouble, right? So, yes, elevator pitches are important. Yes, it's important to simply explain where it is you're trying to go. But at the same time, your hold and your understanding of nuances are important. If you ever watch an Elon Musk video, the thing about Elon Musk that stands out is that he really loves the stuff he builds and he can talk about the nuances, right? Mm-hmm. How many CEOs of companies at that scale can even talk about nuances? How many of them even know what they do, really, right? Like, have they even seen the product, right? Like this guy, that's what it is, right? That's what makes him special. And I think that's an exemplar of something that all of us should follow, which is, yes, there is a simple idea and a simple vision of where we're trying to go. There's some interesting nuances on the way, and let's discuss those.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Like I don't often very use this word, the word balance, but I felt that, the balance of the two sides has to be really important in the case that you mentioned. And I love that, in fact, because if you get to thinking that, you have to know the intricacies and be able to delve deeper into it if required, but at the same time be able to explain the on the top of the surface things in a simple manner, avoiding the jargons. But
It's
but
it's
since
very useful. It's very useful to be able to articulate a simple message for sure, right? Because that's the rallying cry, right? You
right.
can't have a rallying cry that's like 10 paragraphs, right? It has to be a, you're going to storm this castle. Has to be a
Hmm.
one-line thing that everybody can chant and like believe in and go off.
Right, right. And I think goes a long way in establishing trust and interest as well, right? Before that simplistic version of anything, you don't have that rapport going on anywhere, right? Because it's then
Yeah.
just on top of the surface. Great, great. I think that's wonderful to hear. And furthermore, I'd like to I know we just avoided the jargon spectrum, but there are these other things that go on, which do make sense in some shape or form. But I'd love to hear your opinion on it, right? So the terms founder tech fit or founder market fit, right? Those are different terms, but I'd love to understand your interpretations of it and how much of it is important for any founder to internalize before they get into the market. Like just that when you're starting out, you're thinking about so many things. It could either be building or much of the things that you have way more experience about, right? But how important is it to consider these factors and then set out on that, because you're committing, let's say, 10 years to the minimum of your best years of your life, right, when you're developing this journey. So how do you go about figuring these terms out, if at all? And what do you think is your opinion here?
No, I think the reason you should always ask yourself the question is, why do I have an unfair advantage here, right? And unfair advantages show up for
Okay.
one of two reasons. One is you worked in a space for a length of time and you have a real understanding of what it is that you're trying to fix, right? Again, I'll give you an example. Right? Like I was a CTO 8 months. Did I know what I was doing? Hell no, right? It took a good 6-7 years after that to figure out what it is I was doing. And I was at least for a large part of that, I was performing as a CTO, right? I thought I was supposed to do XYZ, so I'd go do XYZ. And then, through trial and error, I learned that a bunch of this stuff's actually really bad. You figure this out over a period of time, right? So it's the same here, right? Which is that, for example, we invested in a company that's building observability SRE tool, right? And the founders there, Piyush and Nishant, they are, they've been doing this for a while, right? Piyush has built many, DevOps and SRE systems over the last 10, 15 years. I think of him as sort of, the go-to person for any SRE question that I have, in this part of the world. And so he has like significant domain expertise. And so, it makes sense that he would go build an SRE observability tool, and, we should sort of try to back that because he just has a ton of insights from having done this now for 10, 15 years, right?
Mhm.
But does that mean that if you're young, there's no chance? That is not what it means, right? The other point I made earlier, which is of the spike, right? Where something true is about to become false, something false about to become true, is another great place where you don't need a ton of expertise. In fact, the more expertise you have, the harder it is for you because you don't understand the new world, right? And so that's, if I was young, that's where I'd play, right? I try to find, those shifts in technology and try to sort of leverage that and very quickly build expertise and say, hey, I'm the person to do this, right? Like so many new exciting, serverless paradigms are coming up, and nobody has 10 years of experience serverless. The concept is 2 years old, right? And so you can get, it's a level playing field for everyone. And so that's one way to do it, is that if you're very young but you want to have strong founder market fit, you gravitate to the frontier of tech and work there, and then quickly gain some expertise, right? Or the other thing is you're building something for people who are like you, right? And that's a big one, right? Which is, like imagine if I tried to run this podcast, right? It'd be a disaster. I don't even remember what it's like to be, your age, Raj, for example, right? So, and so that's the thing, right? Is that, if you're going to build a podcast for folks who are young, you better be young or, have some understanding of what they worry about and stuff like that. Otherwise, there's no reason to believe that I would be able to do this, for example, right? So I think it's stuff like that, is that, you definitely want to ask yourself why you will win. And then you have to be able to articulate that in front of investors saying, this is why I think I will win. And, do you believe that? If you do, here's the bank account, I'm accepting wires, right?
Got it. Got it. I think that's great. I think will you win? I think like a large part of the theme of the entire answers has been, this evident ambition and the world class attitude that you need to internalize. And I think that's going to go a long way, at least in my journey, to be able to internalize it. Furthermore, Roy, from what I could gather from research, you've had tremendous experience in scaling teams, building them, a ton of search videos where you've mentioned, either tweets or something of the sort, where you've articulated very well as to how organizations can design themselves to optimize to prioritize better, or the bunch of things that you talk about, right? If you had to give us like a 5-minute, short note, or, a mini TED talk or sorts of how organizations can build tech teams, or even broader than that, design their organizations, what would be that? What would be it like? And, what would be your answer there? I think I'd be very fascinated to hear that.
I think, well, that's a tough one because, there's just so many, again, there's just a ton of nuances here. So I'll give you, a high level answers are very simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be world class, you have to hire people who want to be world class. It's really that simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why someone who's going to be world class want to work with you when they can work anywhere else in the world, right?
Yeah.
And it has to be because you have something that acts as fuel to their fire, right? Mm-hmm. And what I tell very early stage companies is, you're not going to win on salary. You're not going to win on name recognition. You're not going to win on any of these parameters. Your only hope is to change the battlefield, right? And so what you have to do is like, hey, listen, we are going to change the world, right? And yes, it sounds cliched, and yes, it sounds like what everybody else says, but you have to believe it. And you can't just say the phrase, oh, here's how we change the world. No, you have to fill that in with the real phrase. But it should be very clear to people that if that works, then the world looks different, and we get to dominate that, right? I think the thing that the world does a good job of explaining to young people that they need to wait for their turn, and that's BS. Like if you read anything about the French Revolution, if you read about any revolution ever, it's always run by young people, right? Because they have the most skin in the game, and you have to basically, if you're going to do anything interesting with this planet, you're going to have to wrest it away from the oldies who are trying to destroy it, right? And so, that's the mission, right? And so you got to figure out how you're going to plug into that and get people excited about it. And then if the best people come to work with you, then you will find scaling to be a lot easier, because with the best people, you don't need to explain to them how to be mediocre. You have to explain to them how to be world class. And I think that's the question you want to keep asking yourself. It's like, are you building systems and are you building organizations where people have to be mediocre in order to fit in? Or can truly world-class people work for you?
Wow. I think, those are, again, I love the analogies and the explanation there. But a follow-up to that is, how should founders, amidst everything that they are doing, think about optimizing for not just, let's say, building teams, but growing teams as well? There's a slight distinction there, but how do you optimize for, let's say, employee success? How do you optimize for employee experiences? Or let's say, forget the word employee, I think team experiences, right? Because a large part of the mission gets drafted by the team, and it's driven by the team. Like it's always about the team after a point, right? After the initial conceptualization, go to market, things like that, it's always the team. So how should founders kind of optimize for these things amidst everything else that they are doing, because they're busy with fundraising, they're busy with building the product, so many of the different things that they are doing. So would love your bites there, if at all.
No, I think at least for me, the answer is very straightforward, right? You have to feed the soul, right? And so, reminding people that this is why we do this, right? It's very easy for any job to become about, hey, I have these 6 bugs, I have this, I have this PRD to write, I have this code to submit, I've got these things to check. And very soon as anyone who's done any kind of engineering or product will tell you, after the glamour lasts for exactly 10 minutes. And then it's a lot of drudgery, right? It's a lot of sort of crunching execution, and the people who are able to do it day in, day out, keep their eye on the prize, not waver, are the people who win, right? And so execution is massively sort of important in this space. But the way to keep it is to feed the soul, right? Which is to remind people constantly, here's how we're doing what we're doing. One of my favorite things that I tell founders is like, let your engineers and let your team listen to what customers say about you, right? Because that, honestly, they'll find that more inspiring than what you are saying often, right? Because they're like, hey, at least the work I do has some meaning, right? People get some value out of it, right? And people look for meaning. People are always looking for meaning, right? And so if you can give people meaning, if you can give them the ability to be sort of truly world class, and keep reminding them what world class means in the context of who you are and what you're trying to build, I think that's all you need. Some of the best practices I've seen is just do a Friday sort of all hands and just be like, hey man, just to remind you guys, this is why we do this, right? And by the way, hey, here's something somebody else did in the company that looks freaking amazing. Let's take a minute and just applaud it and look at it and be impressed with it, right? And here's an example of someone who sort of broke a bunch of rules and did something, and now we have a very happy customer or a very happy sort of outcome as a result. And let's focus on that, right? The key thing I'll tell you, there's a key insight here, right? This is a concept called resulting, right? Mm-hmm. People look at results and then say that the process must have been good because the results were good. And that's the wrong answer always. The right answer is reward the process, declare the process. Sometimes the results will be in your favor, sometimes the results will not be in your favor, and that's okay. Don't get caught up in results, get caught up in the process, right? There's a very nice line in the Gita that says that, in fact, right? And I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to repeat it, but it's exactly one of the big messages that the warrior Arjun receives is that, do your duty and then everything else will follow. And I think that's the thing here. Just help people with that. Help people do the best they can do.
For sure. I mean, I think, again, that's very thoughtful. And, these are the fundamental things that get missed, right? Because you talk about small gestures, and at the forefront, it might seem like it's very easy to just go and, remind a team member why they started, what's the mission like, and, go about sharing meaning, right? As you mentioned. But again, those things, I think, can be iterated as loud as possible till they start getting practiced all across the board, because I think that's extremely important. And I love how you mentioned, how optimizing for processes and not getting blindsided by results is extremely important. I think those are amazing cues. Roy, this was wonderful, and we've spoken about the tech side a bit, and I heard you on the Surge talk a couple of days back, and I recommend everybody go see that. But at the expense of repeating, would you perhaps have anything to mention for non-tech founders of how they can, let's say, bridge the gap? Because again, this wave of no-code tools very evident out there, and everybody's searching for answers, because a person like me would feel almost given disadvantage of entering this space, because don't come from an inherent tech background per se. So do you have any cues out there before we go on to some of the last questions? I'd love to hear anything you have to say there.
Yeah, no, I think I get this a lot, right? And I think that I think, again, it helps to have been around for as long as I've been around. Like when I got started, if you wanted to buy a server class machine, it would take you 6 months. Mm-hmm. That's assuming you could even get permission to buy a machine like that, because the Indian government wouldn't give you permission. So back then, it didn't even matter if you could write code. It mattered if you could source a machine, right? So that's where the barrier was, right? At one point, which is like, you had to be able to source machines to be able to do what you did, all the way to, well, now as long as you can write code, here's some servers, let's go get it done. To the cloud came in, and suddenly, there are people who don't even know what a server is anymore. They're just writing some stuff and it works, right? Yeah. The trends in software are very powerful, and the question is never why. See, I don't actually think that you can afford to be non-tech anymore, broadly, if you're a founder, right? Yeah. There's no such thing as a non-tech founder. Mm-hmm. There are technology founders. There are technology founders who can write code. There are tech founders who can't write code, but that's okay. But you are a tech founder. If you're running a tech business, you're a tech founder. Yeah. And so your first thing is to just think like that, right? A fascinating story that I heard recently was that the first ever supercomputer in India was actually bought by Asian Paints. And they were using that to do supply chain management, right? And, when you think about those founders, they obviously were not from tech. They were running a paint business. They run a paint business today. And they went and bought the first supercomputer ever. And so that's the thing, right? Go look at what's available. Look at the tools. Retool is fantastic. Airtable is fantastic. Learn to get familiar with them and sort of start working with them. And in this day and age, to say that you're non-tech is a little bit of a cop out, in my view. You can go learn anything you want. There's tons of resources. You can go learn Python for a little bit. Now, no one's asking you to be the best developer there is, but you can build a lot of a technology-enabled business today without any real engineers. And that just keeps getting easier and easier with every passing year. And so, keeping an eye on those tools is very, very critical.
Yeah. And there should be no excuse for somebody who actually wants to, let's say, achieve that goal. So if your goal is that there are no excuses because the tools are already
reject labels, man. Just reject your labels. Don't let other people label you. And this non-tech is a weird label. Like, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. Fair enough. I think that's a great iteration of saying out loud the things that really matter, and I think that's a great segue to some of the last segments. So I want to focus the last 5-10 minutes upon you. Understand what gets you curious. What are some of your values, and what are the things that you are chasing. So with that itself, this is something that always fascinates me, that to get this so the word curiosity in itself has multiple meanings, and I think is a very essential trait. However, beyond that, the reasons that keep somebody curious is something that has always fascinated me, especially with founders and folks from the ecosystem, because I feel they are some of the most curious people, right? So if you had to personally talk a bit about how do you let's say the showing up fact, right? The fascination to still build something, the power to still look, let's say look at 10 years post, right? To keep showing up, to keep wanting to build things and stay curious as much as possible. How do you inculcate that in you, and what are the factors that contribute to that frame of mind, to that attitude per se?
For me, it's very straightforward. Yeah, I get to work with founders every day. And so because I get to work with founders every day, their energy is infectious and it rubs off on me. Mm-hmm. And, anytime I feel like I'm doing too many internal meetings, I just go, I'll call a founder, talk to them. And, she or he will tell me like, hey, this is something I did. And I'm like, holy shit, that's so cool. Let me go think about that a little bit, right? So I think that, to be fair, being curious has helped me in my career. I've been rewarded for it. And so now it's just second nature, right? Like I don't think I could turn it off, for example. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's the thing that, again, I would tell the younger folks is that you inculcate good habits. They actually get very hard to turn off when you're older. And that's really good for you because that'll just keep you going, right? That's the power of both compounding and sort of process, right? So that's broadly how that works for me. And, I think just a general reminder that, you get one life. You want to do the most that you can with it, right? And so I like to basically take a pause and for me, it's once every 2 years and be like, hey, what am I doing? What am I going to do for the next few years? And, am I sort of on the right path for that? Am I sort of, learning? Am I uncomfortable? Because I think the thing that I worry about most is that, as success sort of comes to you, and I'm not been wildly successful or anything, but I've had a fair bit, and there's a lot of comfort that can come with that. Money buys a bunch of comfort, right? And so I have to keep reminding myself that stuff is all a distraction, right? Like you have to be uncomfortable. You have to be, you have to be a little bit hungry to make this stuff happen. So,
yeah. Wow. Keeping the fundamentals alive. And I don't know, like, just hearing this makes such a fulfilling experience, because to think that, you could do this for, let's say, 20, 25 years, whatnot, and still tell yourself that you can't get comfortable and that's a distraction is, I think, a beautiful thought in and out. Further, I want to talk about...
It actually really gets interesting after 25 years. That's the funny part. It's all, you think that you've done a bunch of stuff, etc., but then you're like, at least I'm very convinced that some of the best work I will do in my career is in front of me.
Is yet to come. For sure. And I think the past couple of minutes have been a testament to that as well, because the attitude, as you mentioned, is very, very evident. The next question is fairly, I don't know how to put this, but it's like a headliner of sorts, right? But I've seen, like, I heard hear a ton of content, and some of the founders that you worked with have spoken really highly of you. So I wanted to bring this up, and I was brainstorming as to how I could. So I like to call this creating goodwill, right? So not just from a personal perspective, how do you think of, just lending a hand to anybody? This is like a general attitude that you inculcate, because I've seen some founders speak really highly of you. And this is not just me saying this because I'm in front of you, but I actually have even before that, right? So, how do you go about inculcating that behavior and a general attitude that, is about, being a net giver, as some people put it, right? Or just the other things that you perhaps do to inculcate that. I'd love to know, how you think about that. And, just the creating goodwill factor is what I wanted to call this. And would love your thoughts here.
First of all, thank you. I mean, it's good to know people are saying good things, not just to my face. That's always nice. But I think, for me, again, I'll be, just absolutely honestly, when I got started, people, went out of the way to help me. And they didn't have to, and they did anyways, right? And so I've been cognizant of that it really matters, right? I think the thing that really stood out for me is, I intersected with some scientists when I was in school, and that's what got me thinking about what does it take to be, the best in the world at something, and I think that's that actually is the big advantage you have. I mean, so the big thing that you can give people, right, is you can, if anything, you can help raise their expectations from themselves, and if I can do that for them, then I've actually given them a huge thing, right? But I also am very cognizant of the fact that, in this day and age, right, there's lots of people tell you all sorts of highfalutin things, but very few people help you with the small stuff, right? And so I try to be the person who's like, if someone asks me something, I try to help, right? And sometimes it's small. It's as simple as, hey, can you interview this person for me? How should I think about, doing XYZ, stuff like that. To more strategic, hey, what do you think about this design? How do you think about how we're thinking about building this piece of software, etc. And you try to sort of spend your time with them on that. I mean, personally, because, I've also been someone who really enjoys working on many different things. The ability to help other people gives me a lot of energy. So, I'm not really doing it because it helps them. I'm also doing it because it helps me. But I think, at least, again, to the degree that I would give advice to younger people, I think that being helpful, being open, and being sort of collaborative with people around you is, again, one of those things that compounds so well over a period of time that, it's an absolute freaking no-brainer, man. You should just, if you're someone who's naturally closed off and doesn't like talking about what they do, this is the time to start to break that habit and try to be more open and collaborative. Because, again, it'll compound, and then, 20 years later, you'll find yourself being surrounded by, the world's best at certain things, simply because when they needed something, you were there to give it to them.
For sure. Wow. That's amazing advice for sure. And I think much of it I will apply throughout. And I'm sure, and I hope, in fact, everybody listening can as well, to the extent that they want to, and, they can internalize. For the last question, Roy, I was again like just thinking when I was hearing you, what would be a fitting end, right? So we've spoken about what winning matters, inculcating that attitude. You told us a lot of, secrets as to how you look at founders and a lot of the amazing learnings from your journey. But one thing, so I think exclusion is a great way to decide as well, as opposed to absolute decisions, right? So if you had to at the expense of, again, a stereotypical end, let's say not learnings, but what are 3 things that you would like to, let's say, suggest, which would be absolute do nots, or if not absolute in nature, of course, 3 exclusion points for a 20-year-old something wanting to build products out there. Like, if you had to leave us with that, what would that be? And I think this has been so wonderful.
That's okay. It's a good question. I think, my first piece of advice is do not limit yourself unnecessarily, right? I think that's the thing that there are real constraints when you're a 20-year-old trying to build a product, right? Real constraints, right? You don't have, it's very unlikely that you'll get 20 people together. It's very unlikely that lots of things will not happen.
Yeah.
And so you do have to be very creative about how you solve something, right? And so, I'll tell you the thing that works best in that scenario are the people who are able to figure out what the crux of the issue is and then just go solve that, right? And I think the ability to sort of be able to do that second order of thinking, right, is important. And so what I would say is do not limit yourself, right? Put a bunch of first order, but also second order thinking and apply it to your problem. And then come up with something really interesting that you can do very, very easily to prove yourself, right? The thing to keep in mind is that if your core value prop works well, people will put up with a lot of nonsense in order to work with your product, right? This is the thing that a lot of early, and so don't worry about that too much. It's sort of like one piece of advice I would give people. And the second thing is, just do not be afraid to fail. It's okay. India traditionally has never really been very accepting of failure. And, in the past, failure meant that, you would definitely fall very rapidly through a social ladder that is very hard to climb. And so there were very real fears to it. But, if you're being honest, all of those fears are old fears. I mean, there are no fears anymore, right? Because hey, you fail, you try on something else, right? We've backed, for example, I think of Sai as of MPL, we backed his first company that didn't work so well. The second company, in this first meeting for the second company, we just backed him right then and there, right? And so, people will recognize your quality, and so the risk of failure has gone very, very low, right? Which is all the more reason to just fail fast, fail a lot, learn from failure, just do stuff out there. Don't worry about failing. Is the second, do not worry. Yes. Or the third thing. And the third thing, which I think is a little bit more, I think people have talked about this as well, but this whole concept of being very aware of what your personal burn rate is. What is the lighter you are, the lower your personal burn rate is, the better off you are if you're going to take risks and try to do crazy things. So don't fall in. Money coming in is a bit of a trap. Just be careful, right? Be careful of what it does. If you're not careful, suddenly you own a house and a car, and those payments dominate your life.
Right.
Put a very high price on your freedom.
Got it. So don't limit yourself. Don't get distracted in any manner. The second one was don't be afraid of failure. And the last one was don't get distracted. That was amazing, Roy. I think that's a very, very fitting end to this wonderful episode. I personally have learned a lot and I have a bunch of fun listening to this amazing conversation. And I hope you did as well. And thank you for, spending your afternoon with us. This has been a true pleasure.
No, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited about your audience, and I hope some of them who want to start companies will apply to Surge. Surge is right here somewhere.
Yeah. Yes.
And, I look forward to talking to some of you guys. Yeah. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Jivaj.
Thank you, Roy.